Welcome back to episode 9 of CyberVault. Absolutely thrilled to have David Moon join us today. David is the founder of ArxNimbus. He comes with a wealth of experience working as a corporate CIO for many large enterprises and overall a really strong background working within the world of cybersecurity. David, a pleasure to have you on, and would be great to hear a little bit more about you before we get kick-started.
Thank you, Kelly. And I really appreciate that warm introduction. Most of my career I've spent as a corporate CIO and really had a lot of tremendous experiences. Technology is an outstanding area to be in career-wise. We have so much leverage that we can bring, and yet we have to be mindful of security throughout in order to really capitalize on the power that technology can bring us. And so after my career as a corporate CIO, I was a partner with Accenture and then part of the cybersecurity practice at both Capgemini and PwC, where I really had so many different client experiences that kind of started to point in the same direction. And that is our challenges around security that are so heavily based on, even in today's world, professional opinion and expert judgment. And it is perhaps a hallmark of the maturity of the cybersecurity profession itself that just now we're really starting to tend towards more data-driven analysis, more proper diagnosis, the kinds of things that the medical profession, if you will, has really had for over 100 years. In terms of running tests, getting data, doing a proper evaluation or diagnosis first before prescribing treatment, if you will. So there's a lot to be learned from other professions like this. And the founding of ArxNimbus in 2016 was really an effort to capitalize on that and bring that kind of data-driven approach to this market.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the overview. And what I'd really like to get started in, kind of straight away, is you've had an incredible career working in cyber, like you mentioned, and kind of the exposure you've had between all these different businesses has allowed you to get to the point of building ArxNimbus. And I think it'd be really interesting to kind of deep dive into what is it that caused that inspiration to really kind of kickstart in 2016.
Mm-hmm. There were a number of experiences. One I remember that was in the actually a mortgage banking industry where we were doing a presentation. I was presenting at the Princeton Club in New York, and it was a really kind of the top 10 mortgage bankers in the U.S. at the time. And one of them, who was a board member, came up to me after the presentation and said, "Could you present this to my board?" And, I said, certainly, that I didn't think that, what we were sharing was anything that earth shattering, perhaps. But I said, well, she explained, well, that we haven't seen anything like this. And I'm not familiar with the kinds of message that you have here. And it turned out that this was Deborah Reef, who was at the time on the board of GE Finance. And so what immediately struck me was, well, GE Finance, a GE at the time, at least, being well known worldwide as a leader in finance and financial management, that they would not have at least this perspective that I was sharing here. And it turned out that they really didn't. And, so much of corporate America in particular, and also in Europe, and we learned later in Asia, is really governed by kind of the expert, the primary expert. And so if you think about, and again, the medical profession, the ages ago, there was the doctor with the little black bag who would come out to your home, and he'd take a few vitals, maybe at a stethoscope, some very, very basic tests, pulse, heart rate, et cetera, and temperature. And then, say, well, take 2 of these pills and call me in the morning. That was sort of a famous thing. And in today's world, of course, we have diagnostic methodologies, and we have X-rays and MRIs and blood tests that are very advanced. And so, we actually have data, and we base those diagnoses on data. And most of us on a personal level would trust a physician that was doing that much better than one that was running off of, well, my opinion is that you must have this particular ailment, and so we'll treat accordingly. That would seem quite funny in today's world, and yet we do that in cybersecurity all the time. Another experience, we had a West Coast pension fund in the U.S., about $9 billion in assets under management, and presented to them. And the CFO who was in the room said, this is wonderful. You have such outstanding approach and technology for this. But at the same time, it will help others, but it really can't help us. Well, of course we said, well, why is that? And he responded that, well, because we simply have no cybersecurity risk here. Now, our temptation at the time was to say, hang on, hold the phone. We need to call the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times because you need to be on the front page of tomorrow morning's edition. Because this must be shared with the world, because we've never seen such a thing where someone has zero cyber risk. It's literally unattainable. And yet, what he went on to explain was, we hired a new CISO about 6 months ago, and he has everything under control. And we haven't had a breach since. And so this mentality of we haven't had a breach since, and you could fill in the blank. We did X, we implemented Y, we hired this person, we took this new approach, we decided to get alignment with NIST or some framework. Whatever you want to fill in the blank with, it's this really kind of, unfortunately, false sense of security that comes from some of these actions, because quite often senior management is really not able to see into what's happening. And I guess our kind of corollary for that is, if you had a very basic sort of, my grandfather actually was CFO for a while for a cheese factory, believe it or not. So if you had this cheese factory and it's delivering cheeses around the countryside, it has a fleet of trucks. Whoever's running the fleet of trucks, you would expect them to say, here's how many trucks we have, here's where they're located, here's how often they break down, here's what our maintenance cost is, and there would be numbers behind this. And yet, all too often, when it comes to cybersecurity, we simply, as management, we kind of lose our minds with this belief, and it's a very unhelpful belief, quite frankly, that you simply cannot measure cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And that is something that really is our mission in life, to punch through and get us all to the other side, where cybersecurity can be a corporate function that is managed much the same way that marketing, operations, manufacturing, or finance, other functions would be managed, and that's through the numbers.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you kind of touch base on this towards the end here, but it's I think within cybersecurity, a lot of people don't necessarily want to understand it or take the effort to understand it because of all this extra technical jargon that's thrown out there that makes it seem overly complicated in comparison to actually most of the time it's remediating risks and looking for said risks as well. And I think kind of, you talk about the fact that there's a lot of senior leaders and individuals out there that will be like, oh, I've hired in an expert, I just leave it to them. And I think kind of last time we spoke, we made the joke that you wouldn't do that with any other division in the team. You wouldn't leave your finance guy just with the books and not want to have a look at what's going on. So I suppose, what do you think the implications of this are within the working world? What do you think kind of this is, or the challenges that this is really causing for the progression of kind of, I suppose, the implementation of security practices within enterprises?
Well, it really is starting from the board on down, quite frankly. I recall sitting in on a board meeting that I was asked to attend about a $3 billion company. And the CISO came and presented, asked for another 30 million in cybersecurity budget. And when the directors that were assembled there asked, well, what do we get for this 30 million? As well, they should ask such a question. The CISO's eyes kind of lit up, almost like it was Christmas Eve or something, and said, well, you get better situational awareness across the domain. we'll get endpoint behavioral analytics, and we'll increase our Splunk rules from 200 to 320. And he was so excited. And the directors who I was sitting with next to, they sort of turned to each other and said, "Well, do you know what did he just say? Do you know what he said?" No, I don't know what he said. And then the consensus started to form that but he seems like a really smart guy, and after all, he's our guy. So I guess we've got to just bet on him. 30 million approved as planned. And the very next presenter was the CFO, it turned out. And he had all sorts of charts and graphs and numbers. And here's the accumulated depreciation in financial terms, et cetera. And really had to prove his case and was grilled quite actively by the board members before they would approve his proposed course of action. And it was such an amazing dichotomy. And yet, this is happening all throughout corporations globally. And it's unfortunate. And really, in many ways, we can't get to a better place until we get past all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's literally, you talk there about the fact that 30 million, for example, I know that's just one scenario, but that's not a small amount of money realistically. And it's expensive to not get it right. You're putting the trust into somebody that you're bringing into the business, but if nobody's kind of taking the measures to really make sure that actually is, why we're not going through this with a fine tooth comb, do we need all of these things, are the things that we're missing? Obviously, kind of, it's that cost versus what the actual cost is. And I know you've got some really great examples of this, but kind of, what is the reality for businesses if they don't start deep diving into some of these kind of, I suppose, whether it's the technology or the vulnerabilities that they're facing?
Right. So there are really kind of three key questions that we like to pose, and they're just so fundamental. And it's sort of a funny kind of perhaps human psychology sort of dynamic here, because these things are so fundamental that they're missed. And so the three key questions are, how much cybersecurity risk do I actually have? And ideally, that should be stated in dollar terms, because only then do we really understand, as you pointed out earlier, how much resource and how much funding we should be throwing at the problem. And the second question is, where are those risks originating? Where is that threat exposure originating in sort of a ranked order, ideally, so that we could get down to root causes and see what the true origins of these things are and start to point our efforts more fully in those directions, as opposed to just trying to kind of carpet bomb the landscape, if you will. And then the third question is, and what are these exposures costing me? And of course, this is where the insurance industry is particularly insightful on this, because they really don't, in many ways, insurers don't really care if it happens to be cybersecurity that they're insuring, or if it's a shipping fleet of commercial ships that they're insuring, which is really where, Lloyd's Syndicate founded the insurance industry in the 1600s. Or if it's, a series of property and casualty, maybe warehouses, fire insurance, that sort of thing. They really need to be just data driven in the insurance industry. And they provide really kind of a hallmark for us. And so one of the things that happens there is that we can actually obtain a price on our risks. And we can get that quite handily by just asking for a quote on cyber insurance risk. And a portion of our risk can be transferred to a commercial insurance policy. And we will know, then we'll know actually what that cost is. And there's kind of an interplay as well that very few organizations understand, which is between what should I be investing to remediate and correct these exposures through technology, through processes, perhaps internal training, et cetera, and what should I be transferring to a commercial insurer. There's kind of a dividing line between those two that we work with companies pretty actively on. and show them really where the optimum point is. But you can't really get to any of these things until you can first understand those three key questions.
No, really, really helpful. And I think it just kind of reiterates the importance of that visibility element and really kind of seeing, I suppose, where the risks are and where the money's going, or at least where it needs to be spent. You don't want to be putting all the money into the wrong thing. And one thing I really want us to cover is AI adoption, because I think this is, and again, I know you've got some great stats around this, but I think this is something that's widely becoming a new hot topic. It's like the new cloud, in a sense of everybody seems to be wanting to adopt it and plugging money into it, whether it's through automation or they want some kind of form of Gen AI, and it's really helping kind of replace some of those more monotonous tasks. But let's talk about how important it is as well to be mindful of the security practices that I suppose come in line with that. I mean, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, so there's a variety of kind of data points on this, and you can kind of pick your spots on it. But generally speaking, what we find is, and let me use an example. So there was a recent EY study in which 85% of corporations said that they now are not only investing in AI heavily, but they are counting on AI initiatives to boost revenue, reduce costs, and other really material things for the organization. So as you look at this from perhaps a shareholder point of view, what you're really seeing is we've now turned that corner where it's no longer just a novelty or kind of a science project in the back room somewhere. It's now something that we're actually counting on. And so that's a very important distinction. But at the same time, there was a PwC analysis of much the same type of audience that showed that only 11% of these corporations could say that they had proper governance over their AI initiatives. So you have something that now has become vital to the organization, and yet at the same time is really almost not governed at all. This is this is a pretty substantial gap, 85% versus 11%. And of course, that will have to be brought back into alignment at some point. But many of these initiatives, it turns out, are launched by perhaps marketing or operations, maybe product management, and they're not being coordinated with even any IT oversight, let alone cybersecurity input. And so it conjures up the expectation that security will be added after the fact. And of course, that's always more costly. And it's difficult, but we may encounter certain situations where there is a security compromise and there has not been proper security. I mean, just something as simple as model poisoning, for example, attackers are getting ever more adept at doing, and yet we have billions of dollars being invested in these efforts that are very poorly secured because of the fact that security is being treated as after the fact.
Yeah. And it's kind of that famous thing, isn't it? That it's almost like realistically, you want to prevent the fires, not put them out. But a lot of the time, it's always that, oh well, it won't happen to me. It won't happen to me. Like it's only this percentage, so we'll be fine. And then when it happens, and you don't have the measures in place, and you spend significantly more amount of money than you would have if you just put the preventative measures in. And no, I think kind of, David, you've given so many really insightful kind of things there, and I think a lot of takeaways for individuals who have been listening. But I really kind of, to close the podcast off, I would love to kind of see, for anybody watching, what would you tell them as, look, after you finish this podcast, this is the first thing you should be doing. If any of this has resonated with you, this is my advice to go off and prioritize this.
Right. So I think the first thing is obviously to get started. and get some level. It may not be completely comprehensive or something that would take months by any measure, but some initial understanding of one's cybersecurity threat exposure and what that's costing. So take that attitude of, someone builds a house next to a river that floods every 10 years, and whatever the value of that home is, 1/10 of that is their annualized cost of living in that location. So it's not necessarily rocket science, and those kinds of analyses can be done in the course of a matter of days. So I think at this point here in 2025, going without that level of insight is really just not well advised. So that would be the first starting point, and we can accomplish that, and others can as well. But get it based on actuarial science, real data, your actual data, validate that, and make sure that the results are aligned with a proper framework that's recognized, like ISO 27001, NIST 853, or CSF, MITRE ATT&CK framework. These are all very useful constructs. So when we start to see in financial terms what our exposure is against these frameworks, we can start to see the details of where to really point our efforts, as you pointed out earlier. And now we can begin the first stages of formulating a plan that is really directed towards where the greatest harm could be occurring for the organization and what we're really exposed to the most.
Awesome. No, really, really great insight, like I say there, David. I think so much to take away from that, and nothing more valuable than having that action point to close out with, because I do think there's a lot of people out there that probably want to start looking at those preventative measures and not waiting for the bad things to happen. But thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and it's been a pleasure.